Cheers, guys. Epix 911, welcome to the Monday, August 7th, 2017 edition of VR News. Let's start the night off with some really fantastic news involving the TPCast. So one of the most frustrating things for those of us with an HTC Vive has been knowing that the TPCast exists, seems, based on most accounts, to solve the wireless issue, and yet we can't buy it. You could, but technically, legally, not really. Well, good news. The FCC, that's the US body for electrical emissions, safety standards, they have given the TPCast approval. And not just the transmitter, but the battery portion as well. Essentially full approval. And why that's important is most other countries or sets of countries like the EU, they will generally quickly add their own version of that once the FCC stamps it with theirs. So hopefully this means an announcement soon for a release date when essentially the rest of the world can get their TPCast. Next up, Tauceti Uknown Origin, a fantastic looking virtual reality FPS. This game from devs Badfly Interactive. The first thought I had when I saw this game was a flashback memory to when Far Cry was just released. Those of you who played that game, who were into FPS games, you probably remember most FPS games, yeah, the polygon count was going up, but they all seemingly used that same damn brown palette. Well, Far Cry comes along and rewrites the rules on the brown palette completely by not including them. It was lush, green, tropical jungles with very blue lagoons. It was just eye-poppingly vibrant. Well, this game similarly looks gorgeous. I've said before, gameplay for me trumps graphics, but if you can have both, well, of course, I'd rather have that. So definitely a game, personally, that I'm going to keep some tabs on. And next up, Oculus adding to their rendering arsenal, this time with what they are calling stereo shading reprojection, that they say can save up to 20% of GPU performance. So last year, Oculus introduced asynchronous space warp. Vive had their version of asynchronous reprojection. Well, now Oculus developing what they're calling stereo shading reprojection. And the basic premise is when an image is rendered stereoscopically to your HMD, each eye gets its own image of the same object, but from that eye's perspective. Well, there's a lot of stuff that could be recycled so that you don't have to draw quite as much for the next eye. And that's the basis of this technology. Now, it doesn't come without hitches. There's a few. You can see this first picture, green artifacts on the right side of the image. Those are removed prior to rendering. With this next picture, you can see what's called edge ghosting. So look at the left side, the left portion. You'll see a reddish ring effect just slightly to the right of the red orb on the left side. Well, just as with the other one, that is removed prior to rendering. This one with a filter. It's the net of recycling and then doing the cleanup, what you're left with, that can add up to 20% in saves. It kind of reminds me of a graphic card back in the 3D acceleration wars for the PC called Power VR, and similar in that, and this is just very low level or high level rather overview of it, it didn't render what you couldn't see in the scene until your in-game avatar character, whatever, could actually see it. So very cool. Next up, those of you who are into Dota 2, admittedly a game and genre that I really haven't gotten into, and mostly just because I haven't tried it yet. Knowing me and my addictive gaming personality, I'd probably like it. So gonna probably steer clear of that for the next little while again anyways. But the people behind Dota, well, they've created the Dota 2 VR Hub. Dota matches like StarCraft before it in Korea and now a lot of other places in the world is proving very popular as kind of a spectator sport. Well, that's what this does. This hub allows you to Select at the beginning of the game whether you want the game or the hub. You choose the hub, and then you and up to 15 people in your instance can then watch live game matches unfold from the 2017 International Dota 2 Championships. So it's a virtual front row seat, essentially, that you get. If you've got the game installed on Steam, basically download it for that game's DLC section. You'll see it. You can install it from there. Next up, PlayStation VR's Moss, which captured a lot of hearts at the E3 event this last June. Well, just got a little bit cooler. This game for PlayStation VR revealed at E3, featuring a rabbit hero by the name of Quill. Well, the animation director, his name is Richard Lico, he got the character, and knowing that the character could only really communicate in squeaks, he got an idea to have the character use in-game American Sign Language. Now, I think there's all kinds of benefits to this, not just the obvious, which is for those who are hard of hearing, they get basically a front row seat to the communication, but also as far as animation is concerned. A lot of those finger movements for American Sign Language, they're not easy things necessarily to render. So I think this is even going to help character animation on one level. Either way, very cool. Learning sign language on my bucket list in the same section as learning Hindi, Mandarin, and Japanese. Probably never going to get around to them, but damn, it would be cool if you could speak all four of those. Moss is going to be available this winter holiday season. Talked about my love for space quite a bit, and I remember what the catalyst for me loving space was. It was 1980, it was Carl Sagan, and it was Cosmos, the series. Watched it with my dad, blew me away. 3 months of just jaw-dropping awe. That's how I viewed it. And it would kickstart just a lifelong love affair with all things space, got me into amateur astronomy, all of that stuff. Well, there's a game called Space Odyssey. Just cleared 2 crowdfunding hurdles, an Indiegogo and a Kickstarter. Also involves Neil deGrasse Tyson. For a lot of people, Neil deGrasse Tyson, along with others, Bill Nye, Michio Kaku, they've kind of filled in for what was missing after Carl left this planet. Not going to make this a sermon about crowdfunding mishaps. Suffice it to say, like I said, both Kickstarter and Indiegogo campaigns for this were successful. It's going to have educational elements. That's the point of this game. So their tagline for Space Odyssey is an awe-inspiring gaming experience of galactic exploration and colonization. It's not a full VR game, but it's going to have missions that are VR missions. When we were young, maybe some of us returning the favor to our own kids, but parents would try sometimes to disguise an education, learning experience, or learning tool as a game. And most of us caught on and we weren't having any of it. And yet it's an industry in and of itself, stuff like Leapfrog, and there are a dime a dozen software companies as well that just do educational games. Well, what they are trying to do with this project is first and foremost make it an enjoyable game that has educational lessons, learning aspects to it. Sometimes, though, realism isn't always a good thing. Take, as an example, the original Elite game. It had 2 sequels before Elite Dangerous. They were Frontier titles. That was the name that they went with at the time. They featured a realistic flight model, what it would actually be like to fly in space with Newtonian physics. And to summarize, it wasn't fun. You spent 5 minutes lining up for what would be another 5 minutes slingshot past each other. You dusted off and you did it again. And that is why most space games, overwhelmingly so, will use World War I, World War II dogfighting style for their combat systems, which is completely unrealistic in space, but it's a hell of a lot more fun. That's one kind of worry. I hope they do keep certain elements just fun. The other one is a lot of people have assumptions about space that are just not true. Hollywood partly to blame for that. The biggest one for me in a movie filled with big ones. It billed itself, The Martian, as having accurate science. And it did in parts, but there was a lot that was just eye-rollingly bad non-science, like the global dust storms, flipping habitats and vehicles, like an Earth hurricane or twister. No. If you were actually on Mars, in the middle of those, yes, dust storms can kick up dust and cover the entire planet, but it would feel like a very average, windy breeze on a beach in Oahu somewhere or Maui. Put it this way, it wouldn't cause you to stagger in the slightest. It would just feel like a breeze. So the takeaway question, is it going to be fun? Is it going to be enjoyable? We don't know. Just putting somebody's name on something doesn't necessarily indicate it's going to be a winner. We could talk about a certain sword game and a certain author that then had to pull out. But the truth is, until they release it or we find out more, we just won't be able to make that assessment. But I've made a note for myself. I am curious. I will want to check this out. And those of you with kids, expect me to update you on exactly that. Is it fun? Can they actually learn? All right, guys, that is it for the Monday edition of VR News. As always, cheers, guys.